Guys, this is Tarot with Kittens, Weights, and Tarot, and today we are actually in Loki's room, just because I thought the lighting was better in here because it's a little later in the day, but we are going to dive into another episode of Spooky Tales. Ah! Many of you have requested to hear some more of my spooky tales, and well, since we are in the spooky season, I might as well tell more spooky tales, although I would probably tell them any time of year, but it just seems more apropos this time of year. But just remember that as I tell these spooky tales, number one, it's not actually, I know it's called spooky tales, but I really don't want people to feel like they should fear the unknown. Actually, my whole point in doing these spooky tales is so that people feel as if they're not alone, because you're not alone. There's other people who have had, probably experiences very similar to yours. So if I share my experiences, I want people to know that there are other people out there who've had very similar experiences, and that, this isn't a one-off or you should just brush it off. I think that there's so much on this earth that is unexplained, that's beyond our physical senses, that there's other planes of consciousness, of dimension, and science has yet to prove a lot of stuff. I mean, they've done a pretty good job, proving a lot of things and helping, prevent things like polio and stuff like that. But there's just so much that is unexplained. But, there are so many people out there that are trying to, dive into these fields, dive into the paranormal field. And people are trying to figure out what happens to the soul. We know that, some people believe that we have a soul inside. I am one of those people. And it's like, what happens when the physical body dies? What happens to that energy? Because there are many physicists who are like, okay, so, if the body is made up of energy, and we know that energy can only change shape, but you cannot destroy energy, well, then where is that energy that go? Where does it go once the body dies? And so these are questions that are brought up even in places that we wouldn't really consider, woo-woo. So anyway, just stuff to keep in mind. So let's dive in to the spooky story for this particular video. And right away, what came to mind was my experience at one of the high schools I used to teach at. So this was like it was like at the second high school I've ever taught at. And I taught there for like 5 or 6 years, something like that. But anyway, the school's totally remodeled now. So where this originally occurred, I mean, there's new buildings on that space, but this was back when still the old buildings were there. The school isn't super old. It was built in 1950, but the original school itself was built in the 1800s. Then they moved that school. Just there were more people pouring into the area, early 1900s, and so they needed a particular, like a school to accommodate all the school children, or school age children that were coming into the area. And so there were more people moving away from the area of where the original school was. So they physically moved the school, bits and pieces of it, to this new location, which is in El Cajon. Pieces of that original school are actually at a different school, which is in charge of keeping like the history of, our town and stuff like that. So there's so much I can go on about that, but we're talking about the spooky stuff. So, okay. I used to work in, we'll just call it like room 108, because I think that actually was my room. I've always been in a hundreds room, because there's like a hundreds building, 200s building, 300s building, so on and so forth. Well, this high school, it had these older buildings are the ones that are from 1950. And so they have double doors on either end of a hallway. It's basically like a long tube or, thing that has all these classrooms. So there's double doors here, there's double doors here. And then inside there's all these classrooms. And then you have like the linoleum flooring. And then you have all these lockers that kids just didn't use anymore because too many kids were like putting like, M80s and stuff in the lockers and like blowing up the lockers. So students of the early 2000s and forward lost the privilege to have a locker. So those were all chained up. You can no longer use those lockers. So it was my thing where I like to finish all my work before I go home for the evening. And if I wasn't coaching, like it's not my season because I'm a track and field coach, I would usually stay behind, do some, grading and stuff like that. Or if it was during the season, then after practice, I might go into my classroom, finish up a few things, and then I'd go home for the evening. So the latest I'd probably stay would probably be maybe like 6 o'clock, sometimes 7 o'clock. Which isn't, terribly late at the school, and most of the teachers are gone, but the custodial staff is there. And so I'm in room 108, and it's a total like old school 1950s like classroom. It's got linoleum, it's got the old school desks. There's a chalkboard that's been covered over, and there's like, we still have like the old school chalkboard, but there's like also the whiteboard and stuff like that, and like a busted old like projector screen. It has the windows that you had to like crank open, and because there's no AC. There is now at the modernized school, but like back in the day there was no AC, and so like the slats of the windows would like open so that you can get some fresh air in the classroom. They had a couple of ceiling fans, but they didn't work, and there was an old school heater that also didn't work, and then there was supposed to be some sort of like jimmy rigged like AC unit, which also didn't work. So and by the way, it's like in the armpit of El Cajon, so it's like freaking hot when the sun is out, and it's in like more of the summery months. It is hot, like spring, summer, like ugh. You are sweating in your classroom. The kids are literally like sticking to their seats. It's gross. So one night I'm staying behind, and I'm just like grading papers, and I had the door kind of propped open, just in case people, I want to see the people that are going past my door. So it was like after school, so they had already shooed all the kids out of the hall, and then they locked the doors on either side. So you can open them from the inside, but you just can't open them for the outside because they're trying to get kids off campus. Like, go home now. Go be free. Why are you staying on campus? Nobody knows. And so there were teachers that were finishing up, and they were leaving, and they, oh, bye, Mrs. E. And I'm like, bye, and then I can hear, the custodians kind of outside. So I know that they're getting close to my building, where they're going to throw away the trash and do the recycling and stuff like that. And I'm just working on some papers. And it's pretty quiet now because I think I'm the one of two teachers left in the building. And all of a sudden I hear crying, but it was really, really soft, kind of hard to hear, kind of like a muffled, like, kind of crying. And I was like, what? So I stop what I'm doing, and I put down my papers, and I look out into the hall, and I see that there's one classroom still open. So I think, oh, maybe the teacher is consoling a student or something like that. Oh, so, okay. So then I go back in my room, I'm continuing grading papers, and then I hear the classroom door close, and that teacher leaves, and I'm like, all right, see ya. And I assume that the student is probably walking out with the teacher. Okay, so then, I don't know, another 5-10 minutes goes by, and all of a sudden I hear it again, like, this crying, and I'm like, I thought that kid left with the teacher. So I stop what I'm doing, and I walk across my classroom, and I look out the door. And by the way, my door has like a porthole in it, but my dude who does window film like for a living, like he frosted the porthole so kids would stop looking inside my classroom and harassing my classes. So I'm like looking out, and I'm like, all the doors are shut, and I know that I'm the last teacher in this building. So I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody left a kid behind in this building. So I'm like, okay, so I thought maybe if I could be really quiet, I could hear it again, and then I would know where this child is. So I go back to my seat, and I'm just like kind of grading, but now I'm just like waiting. And then I hear it again. It's like, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I'm trying to listen, and it sounds like it's coming from next door. And I'm like, did he not go home? Because he was like my partner teacher. We used to team teach EL students. Like I used to be an EL teacher for intermediate and advanced. And then I used to teach like a writing class and stuff like that. So I thought that he didn't go home for the night and that maybe he's with the student. So I went out of my classroom and I went next door into his, well, I didn't go into his classroom, but I looked in his little porthole because he didn't have a covering on his window. And so I'm like looking in the porthole and I'm like, but his classroom is dark. Like he's gone for the day. And I'm like looking in there. I'm like, is there a kid in there? I'm like jiggling the door. I'm like, it's locked. So strange. I'm like, I could have swore that I heard the kid like in that classroom. So I go back in to my room and it happens again. I hear that crying again. So this time I'm like, okay, I'm gonna determine where this girl is next door in this classroom. So I go up against the wall of the back of my room because it is abutted to, you know, the other teacher's classroom next door. And so I got like my ear basically to the wall and it's like I hear the crying. It's a little bit louder, but now I realize that it sounds like I'm standing in the crying. And all of a sudden it gets very cold in that corner of the classroom because it's the back corner of the classroom. And I was like, and it sounded like the girl was like, I was standing on her. And I was like, okay, but it didn't scare me. It was just strange and I started to get weird goosebumps. So I'm like, okie dokie. So I just go back to my desk and I sit down and I'm like, okay, little crying girl, you can go home now. And I'm like grading papers and I'm like, alrighty then. So then it stops. I'm like, maybe it was my imagination, you know, maybe it was a stressful day. It was always stressful at that school. So I'm like, it was a stressful day. Maybe like my brain's playing tricks on me, you know, stuff like that. And so then it's quiet again. And then loudly, I hear a group of students in the hall, like literally a group of students, like they're talking loud. I can hear the slamming of the locker doors, like they're getting stuff out of their lockers. I hear like the you know, like sneakers on the linoleum, like they're squeaking on the linoleum as they're like walking. And I hear them, they're talking, but I can't really make out their conversations, but I just hear a lot of laughing, like, oh my God, yeah, you know, just like, you know, laughing like kids do, you know, teenagers. And I was like, dude, I thought they locked these doors. And so I stop what I'm doing again. By the way, it's like really hard to get my work done that evening. And so I go out into the hallway because I'm ready to be like, hey, you need to get out here. And as soon as I went in the hallway, the sneakers stopped, the laughter stopped, like it was dead silent again in the hall. But literally, like I could hear them laughing just until I got into the doorway of my classroom. And I was like they couldn't, like I didn't hear them run away. Like they can't just disappear into thin air. So I'm like, what? And I'm like, at this point, I'm like, do I really have to stay here and finish this stuff, or could I finish this stuff at home? I'm like, nah. I'm like, I don't have that much left. I could just like finish it. So then I start to walk back to my desk and I hear the double doors like ching, 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 like opening. And I'm like, oh my God. And, and I run out into the hall and it's the custodial lady. And she's like playing her music and she was so cool. She had like this bright red hair and I mean it was dyed bright red, but she comes in and I was like, oh my gosh, because I always make friends with the custodial staff. And so I had made friends with her and I was like, oh my gosh, like Martha, I need to tell you this. So I told her everything that happened. I told her about the crying girl. I told her about like hearing kids in the hallway and the opening and closing of the locker doors. And like, I didn't know where these kids went. And she started laughing. She like turned down her music and she's like, oh, so you finally heard them. And I was like, what? And she says, okay. So she says, I mean, she's like, I don't know like the history of the school. I know it's not very old. It was just built in 1950. She's like, but we haven't really had any deaths at the school at all. So she says, I don't know where these these spirits are coming from. But she says, like, sometimes teenagers, they go through so many emotional, sometimes their emotions are so strong. She goes, it is my belief. She says, she goes, I'm Catholic, and she goes, but she says, I'm also Mexican. So we have like these kind of spiritual beliefs. And she says, and I just believe that sometimes people can leave imprints, when they have such a strong emotion. And she says, but there are many teachers, she goes, who used to stay at night. They don't stay at night anymore. She goes, but they used to hear that crying girl. And she says, and she's actually in your classroom. She's not in the classroom next door, but she says she's right in the corner, right? She goes, is it really cold there? And I was like, yeah. I'm like, oh my God, that's a ghost. And she's like, see, she says, yeah, espírita. She's like, yeah, she goes, it's a spirit of a girl. We don't know how she got there because not like a kid died in the school or anything. But yeah, she's there. And she says, I've heard her. She goes, I've heard many other kids, like I've heard laughing in the halls. I've heard locker doors slamming. I've heard, I've also seen like classroom doors open and close that are locked. She says, yeah, so she goes, that's why I play my music loud. She says, because if I don't, I get a little freaked out when I clean out the trash cans, for the teachers' classrooms. And she says, so I play the music because I feel like kind of drowns it out and keeps them away. And she goes, and it works pretty good for me. So I just kind of ignore that. Sometimes I put in my earbuds and I just, I try to tune it all out. But she says, yeah, I've heard it. I've heard the girl in your room. I've been cleaning out your trash can and I would hear that girl. I have heard the students in the hallways. She goes, but I think it's just their energy has been left over. I think those are kids that maybe are not dead. She goes, but maybe their energy's here. She goes, or maybe they are dead and they just wanted to come back to their favorite high school. She's like, I don't know. She's like, as far as I know, the school is built on, it's like a tire dump, and it really was like, it's where they used to dump old tires and stuff, like, kind of a landfill type thing. And they built our high school on top of it. And so when they were doing some of the renovations, I remember when they were like renovating the science building, a lot of that old tire stuff was coming up. And so they were like, oh, if you're experiencing like eye irritation and throat irritation, it's probably the old gases of like the tires decomposing and stuff like that. So could cause birth defects and cancer, just be warned. I'm like, great. But yeah, anyway, so she told me all about that, that I wasn't crazy. Like, she goes, yeah, there's many custodial staff who have heard them, but she says this is basically one of the most haunted buildings in the whole school is your building. And she says one of the most haunted rooms is your room. And I'm like, well, that's comforting. Lucky me. Why do I always get the haunted rooms? I'm not scared or anything. It's just like, why my room? So anyway, so there was that. But then she was also telling me, she goes, but she goes, I can deal with this because it's just laughing kids or crying kids in this instance. But she says, there's another classroom that's in the 500 buildings, one of the newer buildings. She goes, let me tell you, I would never throw away the trash in room, was it like 510 or something like that, or 505, 510? I don't remember now. It's one of the 500 rooms. And I was like, why? Like, what goes on in there? And she's like, okay, let me tell you. And I was like, I think I had finally finished my work, by the way, while she was talking. So I'm like, if you are going to tell me something scary, at least I'm done and I don't have to stay, So she tells me this story of, she says in this classroom, she goes, there was this custodial guy, they're all like, they have different parts of the school. They're all assigned different parts of the school to clean and throw away the trash and stuff like that. And she says, so this one male custodian had to go into Mr. L's classroom, one of our other English teachers. And so when he went in there and he was throwing away the trash, and he felt something hit his back. Like, he was like, what the? And there was a stapler that flew across the classroom and hit this poor custodian in the back. And he saw the stapler on the floor and right away was like, hey, like, who threw that? hey, you better show yourself. He says, and then he felt a slap across his face, and it was from an unseen hand, and it was like, and so he went running, screaming out of that classroom. And she says, and he like called like the other like custodians like on the walkie-talkie. It was like, we need to meet in the quad right now. And so she says, like, we all stopped what we were doing. Like, oh my God, like there's an emergency. And so we all go over there, and he's telling us what happened. He's like, I got hit by a stapler, and then there was this hand. I didn't see it, but it slapped me. Something slapped me. There's a ghost in there. He's like, I'm not going back in there. And they're like, well, you have to finish your building and your classroom. Like, and he's like, well, I'm not going alone. And so one of the other men said, he would go with him. And when they went back in there, like nothing happened, when he was with the other guy, and he was showing him like the stapler on the floor, and he was like, it hit me in the back, and it like left a bruise, too. And he's like, yeah, I got slapped, and but but nothing happened. And so she says, but later on, she says, when there was somebody else assigned to that classroom, because that custodian was like, I'll clean any other part of the school, just not that classroom. There was a different guy who was alone in that room. And apparently he also got pelted by objects in the classroom. Like there'd be pencils that would get tossed at him, or he says he saw the 3-hole punch, which is huge, and if you got hit in the head, you'd get knocked out. Okay, so he saw the 3-hole punch like moving by itself, and went, I'm out. Like we're done. Homie doesn't play with poltergeists. And so she says, they had brought this to the school's attention, and were like, basically, like, we're not lying. And they had made multiple reports that it's like this classroom and this classroom in this part of the school, and that I don't know what's going on there, but it's not safe, for us to work there unless we work in pairs. So they actually had to make a special exception for the high school that I was working at, that the custodial staff had to work in pairs if they felt uncomfortable working alone. The custodian lady I was talking to, she's completely fine working by herself, but she says many of the men were not so happy to work alone, so they often worked in pairs. So anyway, I don't know what's going on at the high school now, because I haven't worked there in several years, but I do know that it's been totally rebuilt, refurbished. Those are all new classrooms. There's a new building. They like basically just like knocked down the school and like redid it. So I can't tell you like if it's still haunted or like what's going on, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed that spooky story. I mean, basically every high school I've ever worked at has like some sort of story. Actually at the current high school I'm at, it's not really a story. People say that the first floor, which is the floor that I work on, again, 100's floor, is like creepy. But I think it's just creepy because it's underground and I'm working in the basement, aka the dungeon. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video of the spooky tales. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, or if you have some spooky tales to share. I think some of you guys often share them whenever I do these videos. So if you have more tales to share those down below, so we can basically let people know that, other people have these experiences too. It's not uncommon. And if we talk about it more, I think it would be less scary if it was more commonplace, where people are like, oh yeah, that happens to everybody, So anyway, I hope you guys dug this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to click subscribe, and don't forget to click that ding 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 notification bell for more videos just like this. And if you want to catch a reading from me, head over to www.kittensweightsandtarot.com. Not only do I have a plethora of readings, but I also have my room and body sprays, I have my salves, I have my bracelets that I make, I have my Wally's World Oracle, which was community created and community funded on Kickstarter actually, May of last year, so definitely go check that out. It has my Wally Wallito on the cover and throughout the deck, and it's almost like a find where's Wally. And I have my ancestral altar pendants, my travel witch altar pendants, my rainbow bridge pendants, And I have a newsletter, and it's free to sign up. And I hit your inbox on the first of every month. That is the only time I email you anything. But it has witchy DIYs, arts and crafts DIYs, like decks that I'm using, stones that I'm using, tea that I'm drinking. If that interests you, definitely go check it out. And keep your eyes peeled and your ears open, because my Leon Mystery School is going to be opening in October. That's right, this month. It's going to be myself and 6 other fabulous teachers from here on YouTube who are going to be teaching what they are most knowledgeable in for my mystery school. That's right, I get to be a headmistress. That's like so cool. So I will give you guys more details as we get closer to our opening date. You could check out my website. The Leon Mystery School has its web page there. It's just not completed. So if you want to see like the progress we're making, you can definitely go check it out. And if you want to throw a little love my way, think about joining the KWT tribe over at patreon.com/kittens, weights, and tarot. Lots of goodies over there for you guys. Definitely go check it out. We have private live chats and stuff like that. So I will catch you spiritual homies later. Peace, love, and chicky grease. Peace out.